Right now, there's a really powerful documentary on Hurricane Katrina, which happened 20 years ago, just about to the day, in late August, from when I'm posting this, which is early September 2025, but it was in 2005. And there was this terrible hurricane in New Orleans. Now, it wasn't just a natural disaster. It was also a culmination of systemic racism, a lack of response that was happening by the government, and a really, really dark level of oppression and neglect that ended in so much loss of life and so much trauma for the people of New Orleans. Now, something that you may not know, but you would see it in the documentary, is that New Orleans actually has this incredible cultural mecca for people of African identity, and it's called Congo Square, and it's in the Treme area. And people who, during the times of slavery, people who they were given Sunday off, and they would meet in this place in Congo Square, and they would meet with other people who were enslaved still, but had African roots from all over Africa, and they would practice spiritually, they would dance, they would sing, they would connect, and it was this really powerful experience in a time of intense oppression. So it was this like shining light of freedom that was able to exist through this oppression. But that's in New Orleans. And that's it was also in a place that's this really low-lying land, because it was the cheapest land. It had a disproportionate number of people who had been oppressed, such as people who have roots in slavery, and so and low rent, lots of people who didn't have cars, things like that. So by the time that Hurricane Katrina rolled around, there was like this combination of poverty, this really dangerous land. It was like a bowl surrounded by water, including the Mississippi River, but also these other waters that were held back by levees that have been created by the government quite some time earlier, so they weren't tested or anything like that. It was not at all ready for a big storm. And what happened was that when the storm came, the levees broke. And what's interesting is that in the Netflix show, they talk about how the people heard these big booms and they thought that the government had exploded the levees to protect the commercial quarter, which was mostly white. There's not really evidence of that happening, but the protections were not given to people at that time. And this is actually I think it's the most disturbing part of the whole Katrina thing. I mean, the most disturbing part is the trauma and the loss of life, but this part, it shocks me to my core, and it disappoints me deeply in America. And I know that if we don't talk more about this and bring attention to it, it's possible that something like this could happen again. So after Hurricane Katrina hit, the news people came, to the places that were like the commercial district, or the places where, that there would be like the fun Mardi Gras stuff, and it was like the wealthier parts of New Orleans, and they looked and they were like, "We made it! It looks great! The hurricane didn't even touch us." This went on for some time. At that exact time, in the poor districts, in the 9th Ward, I think it's called, there were people drowning in their attics. The water was rising, the levees had broken, and they didn't even have phones to be able to reach out to the rest of the world. This happened in 2005, that's pretty modern. And the landlines were all destroyed. People maybe couldn't get to their phone or whatever. So it was just a little rumor, kind of basically had to circulate to get to the point where people started saying, "Oh, wait a second. Now here's the thing. If one part of this country is suffering, and drowning literally. And this is metaphorical 100%, but this is true just literally as well. It's going to affect everybody and it will spread to the other part. So what happened after that, after they looked at it and they said, we did it, we made it through. Well, then they found out that this poorer area of New Orleans actually had not made it and was flooded, and there was a great loss of life. Devastating. The waters rose and they eventually came up and they did create massive destruction across New Orleans. Just to think that nobody even thought to check on the poorer individuals who were so vulnerable, and that was happening to them. And then that kind of transpired throughout the whole thing, where the rest of the country of America just kind of wasn't concerned. President Bush at the time just flew over and just didn't really do anything. He just had, said a couple little buzzwords, and the aid didn't come to the people. There was just terrible treatment of the people of New Orleans, and it absolutely was racially, it was related to this systemic racism and the neglect of the people of New Orleans was very inhumane, and it reminded me of like being a developing country, but we weren't. The U.S. wasn't a developing country. We had the resources. They just weren't going to part of the country that was equally as precious and valuable as those people in D.C. who were having their, beautiful conferences or whatever, barely even mentioning New Orleans. It actually made me feel like guilt. At the time of Hurricane Katrina, where was I? What was I doing? And I know I was checked out of it, but I was like, how old was I even? That was 20 years ago. So I was 20, almost exactly. And yeah, I could have done something, and I didn't. And I think it's okay just to have a moment and to regret that, and also to set an intention. I'm glad that the documentary came out so that more voices could be heard and lives could be remembered, precious lives, and that what had happened can also be remembered. This was something else that was really important from it, is that the media characterized the people of New Orleans as violent and like they were destroying the place and looting. Well, now, if you are starved and dehydrated for 5 days and you go to get food from a store for your children, are you looting or are you surviving? They were surviving. They were trying to survive. I heard like a news clip where they arrested somebody and he's like, some lady was like, he's getting food for the kids. Now they're not going to have the food. The stores weren't open. There was no way for them to access that stuff, or there was things that was run out, or maybe they didn't have money, and it's like, was a choice there. There was also this other thing where like the National Guard refused to send more helicopters because somebody had shot at one. But in reality, there are people trapped in their attics as this water has risen so high and they have not got food or water or anything, and they're trapped. They don't have any way to get out. Maybe they can't swim, maybe they're not physically able to swim, and somebody shot up into the air to get attention. They weren't shooting at the helicopter, but just that was enough to stop that. And so it was just this, after I watched this, I just felt so tired and depressed, and like, it just brings tears to my eyes to think that this is America, that this is the best that we all can do. There's so much intelligence here, there's so many resources, and at that time so much was going out to fund military things. And here at the country, there were people that somebody called them like refugees, and then somebody corrected them, they're not refugees, these are Americans. Like, but even like we would stand to give even refugees from other countries help. That's what we stand for. And yet this terrible thing was created after Hurricane Katrina. It needs to never happen again. And there are even more things in that documentary about like housing that was allegedly given, but it wasn't good. It was just for show. And then, there was just so much. So we need to be talking about this. We need to advocate for these individuals, still the people who were affected by this, because the education system hasn't been repaired in New Orleans. It's still bad. It's still there's so many problems with it. So the nation needs to give attention to this, and to the people who are affected, and to make it right. Like, actually, that's funny. I would say make it right. That was the name of the company that offered fake help of those houses to people, and then the houses fell apart. So maybe not make it right, just do what we stand for, and listen, and start to have real conversations about the way the lived effect of being an American is for all of the individuals of this country who are citizens especially, but also people who are on visas or whatever, and then refugees that we might help. Everybody here, also even people who are here illegally, are still human beings. And ultimately, from an indigenous perspective or from a native people's perspective, who is here illegally? That's a much more complex conversation than the words would imply. So we need to stand in our advocacy and start to have these harder conversations, but to move together, because I really do feel like we all benefit one another, and if we can support one another, then that's going to shine a really great light in this country and be much more productive, because then we're going to be able to braid in all of the gifts of all of the people that make up this country. And that truly, that diversity is what makes this country so beautiful. It is our greatest gift. It is our beauty in this country, and it's in truth, and it's in who we are, and it's not being represented in the White House right now. It's not being represented in this country in the political level, but I believe that the majority of Americans have a great majority of goodness in us, and we need to continue to talk and stand for this and advocate for one another and for ourselves all, cumulatively, collectively, together.